Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamley. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of the press. It prohibits the government from censoring, punishing, or restricting news organizations from reporting, investigating, and publishing information, even if that information is critical of officials or controversial. So when journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort were arrested in Minnesota last month for covering an anti-ICE protest inside a church in St. Paul, shock, anger, and concern rippled through the journalism community. What does this action mean for the future of journalism? And how will it impact the way that journalists do their job? Some answers during this 90-minute special edition of Another View, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamley. We've got a very special show for you today, but before we get started, our friend Jay Sennett, and with his Hampton Roads Jazz Incorporated, asked us to remind you that tonight, the lecture, HR Jazz Lecture Series, continues tonight at the Hampton History Museum. That's at 120 Old Hampton Lane in Hampton, starting at 6 p.m. It's free and open to the public. And tonight's speaker is Mark Ruffin. He is the programming director for Real Jazz that is heard on Sirius XM. So he has all kinds of background. He's a Grammy nominee. He's a two-time Emmy Award winner, Jazz Griot Award winner, distinguished author, music writer, producer, et cetera, et cetera. Sounds like he's got a lot to talk about in terms of jazz. And come on out and listen to him this evening. It is free, open to the public, 6 p.m. at the Hampton History Museum, 120 Old Hampton Lane. And I'm sure Jay says he'll hope to see you there. So for the next 90 minutes, we're going to discuss what it's like to be a journalist under the Trump administration, and what the arrests of journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort could portend for the future of news reporting. We have a stellar panel of local journalists with national impact, so let's meet our panel. Barbara Sierra is a retired news anchor and managing editor from WTKR News 3. She's also a former president of the National Association of Black Journalists, the largest organization of journalists of color in the world. And she served as president of Unity Journalists of Color, the convention that brought together African American, Hispanic, Asian American, and indigenous journalists under one roof to share best practices and discuss pertinent information to minority journalists. Hey, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Barbara.
It is so good to see you and have you back on the air. That's so cool.
Thank you for inviting me.
Eugene Daniel is an anchor for 13 News Now Daybreak. You can catch him on air every weekday morning from 4:30 to 7 a.m. with co-anchor Ashley Dennis. He is also the president of Hampton Roads Black Media Professionals, which is the local chapter of NABJ, and he mentors aspiring journalists from Norfolk State and Hampton Universities. Hey, Eugene.
Hey, it's so great to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate you. Michelle Hankerson is the news director for WHRO News. She helped launch the newsroom in 2020 as a reporter. Her journalism career began in print, where she reported for newspapers, including the Virginian Pilot, and she also was past president of the Virginia chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. Hey, Michelle.
Hello. Nice to be in this
Back
room.
In again,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And joining us by phone is Will Leviste. He is an award-winning print, radio, TV, and internet journalist, author, and the original Another View Roundtable pundit. And we are always happy to have his wisdom at the table. Hey, Will.
Hey, a pleasure to be with you, though, virtually.
We're so glad that you're joining us. And Will just actually got back from being in the Caribbean, he and his wife, since
great.
Christmas.
How lucky.
So,
Okay.
Must be
so
nice.
we're jealous.
I'm trying not to rub it in.
Do we know if Will is actually back, or is he calling from the
Yeah,
Caribbean
that
right
could
now?
be. How about that? We inquiring minds want to know, right? All right. So we have this whole issue of journalists being arrested for what they say they were simply doing their job. Before we start our conversation, I want to play a piece that will remind our audience of what happened that evening.
Tonight, former CNN anchor turned independent journalist Don Lemon out of custody, but facing federal civil rights charges after covering an anti-ICE protest inside a church near Minneapolis. Appearing in Los Angeles federal court today, Lemon charged with conspiracy to deprive rights and for violating a federal law that prohibits people from interfering with the right to attend religious services, a move Lemon's attorney calls an unprecedented attack on the First Amendment.
I'm just here to chronicle and to get some answers.
The charges stemming from Lemon's coverage of this protest during a Sunday morning church service earlier this month, where demonstrators say a pastor also worked as an ICE field director.
This shows you just how divided America is. When you look at the protesters here, and then you look at the people there who are praying.
In Lemon's live stream from inside, you can see him interviewing congregants and a pastor who asked him to leave.
We're here to worship Jesus because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world is Jesus Christ.
I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me.
I have to take care of my church and my family, so I asked that you actually would also leave this building.
Lemon repeatedly identifies himself as a journalist.
I'm just chronicling. I'm not with the group. I'm a journalist. They're activists.
But the DOJ is grouping Lemon, who's been critical of the Trump administration, and another independent journalist who was also arrested with the protest organizers. Federal authorities arresting Lemon even after a judge had initially ruled there was insufficient evidence to do so.
Make no mistake, under President Trump's leadership and this administration, you have the right to worship freely and safely. And if I haven't been clear already, if you violate that sacred right, we are coming after you.
Journalism rights groups blasting Lemon's arrest. His attorney saying Don has been a journalist for 30 years and his constitutionally protected work in Minneapolis was no different than what he has always done.
And that was NBC News' Liz Kurtz reporting that story. I want you guys to think back to January and the first time you heard that Don Lemon had been arrested. And we know that there's another journalist also by the name of Georgia Fort. We're going to listen to some sound from her later. But what was your first reaction, Barbara?
Another step in the wrong direction for the freedom of speech for journalists who cover stories across this country. But we've looked at that it's not a slow erosion, really, if I'm honest with myself. We've seen quickly during the course of this administration an attack on journalism, an attack on media in general, whether it's through lawsuits and settlements. It's such a climate of intimidation right now. That was my first response.
Eugene.
Yeah, I saw it as an escalation to what Barbara is just saying, but also for me to put myself into the situation, I would have been in that exact moment going into the church because that is where the news is happening in that moment. And so when you think about it, just having been a reporter in the field, there are so many other things that you would hope you don't have to worry about. Being prosecuted for doing your job in this manner is not one of those, certainly, that you would want to have to face. But that's where we are.
Michelle.
I started thinking about specifically when the administration started talking about the charges and what Don and Georgia did wrong. I started thinking about what it might mean for us as people if we go in a direction where we are choosing which rights covered under the First Amendment are more important than others. Because to me, the way that this is being prosecuted, it is suggesting to regular people that your right to worship freely is more important and is constitutionally more protected than the freedom of the press. And that's not how the Constitution works. They're equal. They need to be protected equally.
Well, what was your first reaction when you heard the news?
A tactic to discredit the media and how it's likely to work because we're in a climate where people do not understand the role of journalism the way that perhaps we did coming up in the 70s and 80s. I think I teach journalism, University of Maryland, global campus, and students are often very confused about the role of a journalist when they see journalists in an activist, what appears to be an activist role, and then on another day appears to be a, objective journalist role. So when we came up, we knew that when a journalist was offering commentary, you would see that put on the TV screen. Okay, they are now offering commentary, and they're not in an activist role. But in this era, it's very confusing when you see an Anderson Cooper, for example, being like an activist on CNN criticizing Trump, and then you see him on 60 Minutes in what appears to be more of a objective journalist role. So that's what I see is confusion and a tactic that is likely to work.
So are you saying that you thought of Don and the work that he was doing at that time as an activist journalist as opposed to, I don't know, what do you call him, a journalist, an independent journalist?
Oh, no. Well, because I understand the different roles and I understand what he's doing as a journalist and what that means. I saw him as being a journalist, just like me going and covering a story in Hampton for the Daily Press. But I'm saying that the general consumer does not understand the distinction the way it was understood before. And unfortunately, our industry has been culpable of that.
So Don was not arrested until a couple weeks after the event happened, and he was actually in Los Angeles covering the Academy Awards. And let's listen to what he had to say as soon as he was released, without bond, by the way.
So look, I want to thank everybody for their support. It truly means the world to me. I have no idea what's going on because obviously I haven't seen anything. I have spent my entire career covering the news. I will not stop now. In fact, there is no more important time than right now, this very moment, for a free and independent media that shines a light on the truth and holds those in power accountable. Again, I will not stop now. I will not stop ever. Last night, the DOJ sent a team of federal agents to arrest me in the middle of the night for something that I've been doing for the last 30 years, and that is covering the news. The First Amendment of the Constitution protects that work for me and for countless of other journalists who do what I do. I stand with all of them, and I will not be silenced. I look forward to my day in court.
Eugene, Don Lemon said that his attorneys offered to turn himself in, but they would not accept that. Just to be able to show a point, is that to send a message to other journalists?
Absolutely, I do believe so, right? And it's not just to other journalists, but to everyone who can see that, right? There's a reason why you want that showing. And I think it's also important to point out, you mentioned the time in between Don being arrested when the actual situation took place. Remember, at first, there was a judge who did not go forward with charges. And so they were able to get this through a grand jury, which is, most people would argue, easier to get charges against someone. So I think there's a few things even within that time span between the actual protest into the church into now that you got to make sure that it's mentioned in that as well.
It's like usurping the system, because if ever there were going to be charges brought, they should be on the local level there in Minnesota, and that didn't happen. As you pointed out, they declined to move forward with Georgia or Don, and then having the federal government overreach into that and to create the perp walk that you just mentioned, because the optics of that, I do think, go back to the word intimidation. I think that there is a push right now to intimidate media on a level where it will quiet the voices of those who are reaching into those spaces that some people don't want to be exposed.
So it's very interesting also because, and I'm going to play a clip from Georgia Fort. She's another independent journalist, multi-award winning journalist in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. And she talked about the fact that DEA agents were the ones who came to her door. And in an op-ed that she wrote in the New York Times, she was saying, imagine what my neighbors we're thinking. You know, here you have a black female and you have DEA agents. That sends a whole nother message. But let's take a listen to, she had the foresight to go on Facebook Live as they were banging on her door. So let's take a listen.
You guys, I wanted to alert the public that agents are at my door right now. They're saying that they were able to go before a grand jury sometime, I guess, in the last 24 hours. And that they have a warrant for my arrest. I've talked to my attorney and I'm being advised to go with them, I guess, down to Whipple. And my children are here. They're impacted by this. This is all stemming from the fact that I filmed a protest as a member of the media. We are supposed to have our constitutional right of the freedom to film, to be a member of the press. I don't feel like I have my First Amendment right as a member of the press because now federal agents are at my door arresting me for filming the church protest a few weeks ago. Again, I don't have a long time here, you guys, but I wanted you to know, for me, agents are at my door right now. My attorney has spoken with them. I did send a relative outside to talk to them. They're showing some type of documentation, apparently, that they got an indictment from a grand jury. I knew that I was on a defendant's list. I did not publish it because it was under seal. And so we've done everything that we can to try and abide by, the advice of our attorneys. But right now, you guys, I wanted you to know I'm going to have to hop off here and surrender to agents as a member of the press. I filmed the church protest a few weeks ago, and now I'm being arrested for that. It's hard to understand how we have a constitution, constitutional rights, when you can just be arrested for being a member of the press. We've seen all these violations. All right, you guys, I gotta go. They're knocking.
Yep, she's coming right now.
Give me 1 second.
As we're listening, I'm watching you all's faces, and the emotion. Michelle, talk to me.
It's chilling.
Yeah,
it's chilling.
Yeah, hearing the kids in the background, I think, goes back to if you have like any sense of how crime works, like this is not this. Okay, well, we'll just accept the idea that there was a crime committed, right? But this is not a violent crime. You don't need agents banging at a door. You can simply ask someone to please turn yourself in. And that's what a lot of people get when they are, like, when indictments come back, even like, because it takes a while, you get, it's private. You get to have a moment with your children and explain what is going to happen. There aren't a bunch of strangers in uniforms where, and keep in mind, they're in a place where there have been a lot of uniformed people doing really violent stuff. It's really sad to hear those children on there.
Barb.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the moment listening back to the audio and hearing the real-time reaction of the family, imagine the tension, and then maybe not having enough time to explain to your little kids that, mom's going to go with these uniformed police officers. First of all, you can't erase a memory like that. And as you pointed out, with many of these white-collar crimes where no actual harm was done to, and there's no victimless crimes, you have the opportunity to turn yourself in. So the optics, I believe, was the goal here in both cases.
She had 24 agents show up at her house.
That's
for
excessive.
One person. EJ, I'm coming to you, Will.
Earlier you asked what were our first thoughts, and there's a thought that I missed, and I think probably all of us agree. My first thought was, are they okay? To have to go through that experience for this circumstance, you have to think, how is Georgia doing? Don, how are they doing? Again, how are the kids doing in this situation as well? So that was the first thing, particularly when I saw that video come out after she was taken into custody. But, it's difficult for me to not look at it as an intimidation tactic. Particularly, let's go back to when they posted the photo of the protester who was arrested prior to Don, prior to Georgia, and the White House putting out the image that had been manipulated to show on her face that she's crying using AI, generated imaging.
And that darkened her skin.
And darkened her skin. This black woman, and that was not how she, was. She was not crying profusely. That was not the look. And it all feeds into, listen, this is what we're going to do to these individuals who are doing X, Y, and Z. It's difficult because, to your point, Michelle, you didn't need to do that in this case, even if you felt that this was a crime that they committed because of the nature of the circumstance. So it was hard to watch.
Well, yeah, I agree with all of what has been said. I mean, it's a tactic that is made for TV, made for social media, made to make it look like a reality TV type of situation, like Cops. Bad boy, what you going to do? What you going to do? That's what this is in a climate where the public does not understand the role of what we do in the way that it used to. So can any of you all envision Bernard Shaw, having to explain himself, or Charlene Hunter Galt having to explain themselves in that way? People would be like, this is absurd to be trying to arrest a journalist for doing their job. But in this climate where everybody thinks they're a journalist, everybody has a podcast, everybody thinks they can do what we do, and people are confused about what is actually that role in terms of the Constitution and the importance of this country and what is acceptable and not. And so Trump and his administration understand that. And so this is just a tactic in this climate that we'll get over, that it's acceptable. You just continue to attack, to discredit, so that when the media does report on something, it's not believed.
Yeah. Go ahead, EJ.
This is the climate we're in.
So a few things I want to kind of get to us in this conversation. I'm sure we're going to get to it at some point. There are a few questions that I had regarding this. One of them, for me, glaring, is that both Don and Georgia are independent journalists, right? I think there's maybe a lot of people outside of Minnesota who may not know of Georgia, who now they're going to know about her and the incredible work that she has done there within that community as not just a journalist, but even supporting other journalists there, particularly in how she covered George Floyd and Derek Chauvin in the trial. But my question goes to, A, would this have happened if both Don and Georgia were not independent journalists? There's a big question in that. If they were not backed by, corporations or other larger companies, that's a question that I've kind of been thinking through. Fortunately, you would imagine maybe in Don's case, right, he may have a little bit more capital from a legal standpoint to fight. But let's say there are other independent journalists who are now going to be placed in this situation. Then I worry, because not everybody has the background of a Don Lemon, even financially background, et cetera, or maybe the support that Georgia may have in this case. So I worry about that. But when we talk about, you just mentioned, the general public not knowing the difference between maybe a journalist and a blogger, et cetera. I watched the hearing that Attorney General Pam Bondi had yesterday before the House, which was absolutely explosive. But the conversation about Don Lemon came up, and she, in an effort in the moment to demean what he does, not as a journalist, she made emphasis to call him a blogger. And I found it very interesting in that, obviously I don't agree with her in that, but we're talking about an administration in the White House that has now created press passes for what they call new media, which includes bloggers and YouTubers and social media personnel to now have access into the White House press briefing rooms in exchange for, journalists not getting those spots anymore. So which one is it, right? I mean, and so it's interesting because it's, when you look at it from that standpoint, it's hard not to then say, okay, so what's the other motive? The real thing here, potentially, right, is that we know that Don has been very outspoken over the years, not just against the GOP, but specifically against President Trump. Mm-hmm. So it's just, when you look at all the layers there's other things at play here beyond what happened in that church.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about journalism under the Trump administration. This 90-minute special features journalists Barbara Sierra, Eugene Daniel, Michelle Hankerson, and Will Levis. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We have some other journalists who are on the phone, and I do want to get to them to hear from them. And let's start with Maurice Jones, who is the Vice President. I hope I have your title right, Maurice, of News.
Vice President of News.
Vice President of News here at WHRO. Hey, Maurice.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. And so I have a question because you used to be publisher for the Virginian Pilot, in management, how would you want your reporters to deal with this situation?
Carefully.
No, I believe in the mantra that the job of our journalists is to comfort the afflicted, and so I believe they should be aggressively going after the stories and making sure folks know what's happening, particularly in communities. And so that's what I would want them to be doing. Absolutely.
And so I take it you take on the weight of pressure that may come from corporate, from other entities, in terms of what they would like to see versus what you know to be true as a journalist, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay.
And he's the one who will get our reporters' phone calls if they end up in a grand jury indictment.
Exactly right. I'm the one that better make sure. I'm the one that better make sure we're paying the insurance premium.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, you brought up an interesting point about the independent journalists and whether or not they have the financial backing to have a legal defense fund like somebody like a Don Lemon, but there are high-profile journalists working for networks that are now being stifled in their speech. And I bring up Sharon Alfonsi from 60 Minutes, who was a former reporter at WVEC and worked with her back in the 90s when she was there. And what she did to create a memo to the entire staff to let them know exactly what she was going through during this editing process for her piece that she worked on for months with this prison overseas that we had connections with. And for Barry Weiss to come in after it had been vetted by legal and pull the story, and the outcry that happened within the organization after that is unprecedented. This is the Peacock Network. This was the network where people aspire to go because of its journalism excellence, which is being eroded by this person who's come in with this new agenda that leans toward this administration. So people are being stifled on a high level. You talk about 60 Minutes, when you talk about what happened to the Washington Post reporter who was raided, when you talk about smaller localities where we're hearing the influence from sales and general managers to lean a certain way, we're in trouble with respect to our independence to report the truth.
Exactly. There you go. Anything else you want to add? Go ahead, Maurice. Or who was that? That was Will? I'm sorry.
This was Will. Yeah, too. I think Barbara just made an excellent point. In response to what Eugene raised, that the attack is still the same. It's just different to the corporate media. So you've got the example she just gave in CBS. So if I got an independent journalist and I know their money is tight, I'll force them to have to lawyer up. And Maurice he's a lawyer, right? So he knows they got expensive fees that they have, right? So as an independent, I'll force them to lawyer up and spend all their resources. They have to mortgage their home in order to fight this absurd challenge. Yeah. But for corporate, then you take a different approach. You hold up deals, you hold up mergers, shareholder value, and mergers. It's the same attack to erode confidence in media in a climate where we're in a society and people don't really understand the role in the way that we used to understand.
Yeah. Maurice, thanks so much for calling in. We do appreciate you very, very much. Let's go to Alvita Ewell, who joins us. She's a former Wavy TV anchor. Hello, Alvita. How are you?
I am wonderful, Barbara. How are you?
I'm doing great. Did you have a question or a comment you wanted to make?
Well, I mean, I'm listening to what everybody is saying, and the truth of the matter is it's sad that we're going to have to change because we're under attack. I mean, and when I say sad that we're going to have to change, I mean, we've been covering journalism effectively for hundreds of years, and whether it's newspaper, print, or journalism that we have now, we've been covering it accurately. And the sad part is that we're not respected anymore, and it's hurtful that we're not respected. I mean, I decided I wanted to become a journalist mainly because I wanted to help people. I wanted to get results. You know, I wanted to be able to help those who couldn't help themselves. And that's exactly what the rest of us are here to do. But when it's not being done in a way that others want to be helped, if you will, the climate is now, okay, we're going to take your privileges away from you. And that's illegal. It's always been illegal. And now they're trying to make it legal. And what's being done, what was done to Don Lemon, what's being done to Georgia, it's illegal. It's wrong. It is. And they're charging us with things that we're not doing. And I'm having to, I work with HD Reps. Reps Media.
I was going to ask you whether the reporters and anchors that you work with, are they responding? Are they nervous about being in this industry now, or what are they saying?
Yes, without a doubt. They're nervous, but they're not backing down. That's the good part.
That's good to know.
Yeah, when I've been working with them since I actually left Wavy. I was at WVEC before that, and I did WTAR radio before I ended up with CKR. But, it's like we instill in them that they are strong, that who they are. Like we always have this whole thing of who am I, how am I perceived, and how do I want to be perceived? And we work with them on that level all the time. And when they get upset about things like this that happen, we were all at NABJ. I'm sure there are journalists out there right now who are listening and watching that were at NABJ when Trump came and spoke to us. I mean, the room was jam-packed. It was very decent and in order, the way it was handled. We did what we knew was the right thing. We did these things decent and in order. This administration is making that very hard, and it's making it very hard for people like me who's trying to keep journalists in order to let them know they can still be level-headed and still cover the stories the way they need to cover the stories. One of the difficulties, too, is coming to I was on the call with NABJ the other night and listening to the fact that now colleges and universities going to have to teach differently, because this administration has changed the way, a lot is changing. And now we're going to have to be, taught how to function and stay on guard when you go to a protest. It's no longer that you just walk in and with a badge and you start covering it. We're being told to leave. And the young journalists in college don't know how to deal with that. And they still have to deal with it in such a positive manner. It's, right now it may be the large journalists like Don Lemon who's happening to, but it's going to be all of us, every one of us. And we've got to know how to cover those stories. And so instructors are going to have to know now how to teach them to be safe, and to change the way that we're being handled because we're being censored now.
Okay, Alvita, thank you so much for calling in, and keep listening, okay?
Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All righty, you take care. Thank you so much. Will, I'm going to ask you a question since you are teaching right now. Are you teaching differently in terms of your journalism students based on kind of where things are going in this industry?
I wouldn't say so. I think teaching appropriate for the times. I wouldn't say that as like some of the things that were just raised about staying safe. I mean, that has always been an issue because, journalists cover war and go into very dangerous situations. But mainly the emphasis is on helping them to really understand what goes on behind the scenes, what is going on in the mind of a journalist, why they ask the questions that they ask, why it's so important to get at the truth by exploring all aspects, all angles of a story. Mm-hmm. And it's really about grounding them in the principles that we came up with in the era, in the professional era, because we came up in the professional era, 1960s, 70s, where journalism schools started getting formed and journalism became, an academic profession, as opposed to a trade, which it had been for so many years before. So it's really about that, and it's really helping them to understand the foundational things and why things are as they should be. Because I keep emphasizing this, what's happening actually out there in the field and in the media landscape is becoming more and more confusing. Like I said, the concern about being respected. I mean, my God, I respected Earl Caldwell coming up reading his column. So by the time I got to being a columnist at the Daily Press and to have Earl Caldwell tell me that I reminded him of his younger self, that he's mentored me, and we're chopping it up and talking stories. I mean, that was the world to me. Yeah. But I wonder sometimes as people are looking at some of the celebrity journalists that are out now, whether they have that same kind of affinity relationship with them. So that's what I try to do, is help them to understand the distinctions between in the role and the importance of our profession to the Constitution and so forth in the country, and they walk away with a better understanding.
Okay. Go ahead, Barbara.
While that's being taught in the classroom, thank goodness, there is no class for the consumption of the viewer to make the distinction between what you see as talk news and real news that's been researched, a real news segment that has multiple layers, which we hunger for, but is no longer present on a CNN or an MSN or Fox. No. So you have people who are doing this gab fest on the latest subject matter, and that is now considered a consumption of news. Well, it's anything but news.
It's somebody's opinion.
It's opinion news. And so I think when the line started to blur there, to the point that's been raised, people can't seem to make a distinction between what is the development of a true news broadcast and one where people talk about their opinions.
Let's go to Caroline in Virginia Beach. Hi, Caroline. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara. Thank you all for this very topical and I think very important discussion. I really appreciate you bringing this to the forefront.
Thank you.
I'm both a reporter and a military veteran, 27 years in the Navy. So I'm approaching this, from somewhat of a unique angle. And I think what's so important here, as well as the journalists being attacked, is these veterans, especially congressional representatives like Captain Mark Kelly, who, all he said was, you do not have to follow illegal orders, right? Which is written in code in the military. And he was attacked for that. Not only attacked, but also threatened with a reduction of his military pension. Are you out of your mind? Excuse me. I mean, I just cannot believe, it just floors me as somebody, especially somebody like him, who is one of our national heroes. Like, that is unconscionable that they went after that man. So it's just beyond me what is happening right now. And especially for our veterans to have their free speech questioned or squashed is unbelievable. So I appreciate you guys talking about that. And I think we need to keep everybody's ability to speak their mind, even if it's something they don't want to hear, as part that is our constitutional right. And I'll be gosh darned if that's going to be squashed. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, for the call. You can feel her passion, right?
Oh, I can feel it. I feel it, Carol. And and the update there, of course, this week, that a grand jury. Earlier, remember I said it's a lot easier for a grand jury to pull up an indictment. Well, a grand jury in D.C. refused to do so against those senators. So it kind of speaks to the case that they felt that the government had against them.
Exactly. Let's talk to Mark from Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon to you and all your guests.
Thank you.
I was professionally trained at Norfolk State University in mass communication, and I would dare say that Norfolk State would have to be, at its time when I studied, probably one of the premier places in what we taught and what we learned to respect and love. I haven't seen it in the airwaves for over 10 years. And so what is happening is that we're crying at this moment in time when true journalism and pure journalism has been dying on the vine. And I haven't heard the outcry about this dying on the vine because people need to maintain jobs versus holding the line of what needs to get reported or not. So now what has happened is, over time, sympathies for the press has been depressed, and now what we have is we have chaos. Now, Don Lemon, what he did, I just never been to any event at anybody's church unless it was a public event of some sort where, there were going to be questions or whatever, the forum open for answers and questions for a journalist to go in a place in a church and just speak or just burst out with questions. I've even gone to multiple occasions when I went to hear the Honorable Minister Farrakhan speak on multiple occasions.
So, Mark, let me help you. Let me help you narrow this down because we don't only have so much time. So, are you saying that you felt that Don was overstepping because he went into the church to report on what was happening? Is that, I'm asking you? I'm not saying that's what you're saying. I'm asking, is that your point?
No, I think he had his right to be there and to observe, but to interject, audibly or otherwise beyond the rules or guidance of whoever was in charge of that event or service, I think he was out of line. And I think the last part of it is that I honestly believe if he and the other reporter knew about the laws or the federal laws on the book, I bet you their decorum would have been much, much different on that day.
Okay, let me get some reaction from our panel. Go ahead, Michelle.
I would love to jump in on this.
Okay.
Because, as we've gotten some more detail, especially on the charges for these two journalists, I wanted to look at precedent-setting legal cases related to the First Amendment. And truthfully, it wouldn't be crazy if Don and Georgia were charged with something like trespassing, right? Mm-hmm. They're not violating the First Amendment, though. And I think I think what Mark was sharing is almost connected, but maybe not in the way that he thinks, right? Going to an event where there is a protest and asking questions is not interjecting. It's not interrupting a church service, right? You're there to cover the protest. The church is kind of incidental. And I don't think, especially when journalists who have to cover these things, right? We have to put this in a bigger context. He's there because this is like an unprecedented, some people are describing what's happening in this country as a constitutional crisis, right? Mm-hmm. So the bigger context is do we as journalists, and I'm a big proponent of this in our newsroom at WHRO, to be humane and to treat people like humans, to back off sometimes. We don't always need to be the most aggressive journalist in the room. But if you are reporting and you're thinking, I'm at ground zero for what some people are describing as a constitutional crisis, I think it's okay to be a little rude. I think it's okay to push boundaries to try to get the information you need. And I think people who have critiques for media, like writ large, we can't have it both ways. We can't say like media is unresponsive, media doesn't know what's going on, but then get mad when media is pushing for answers and pushing for information to help people understand what's going on. I don't think that it being in a church makes it any different than any other environment. But I will say, like, and I'm not a lawyer, but it does look like, you know, at the point that Don was specifically asked to leave the property, he should, like, you know, in my opinion, I probably would have.
Well, that's how I teach my school.
I would have left.
Mm-hmm.
I would have, like, taken my time to leave. But I would have left because that does open you up to, like, a lesser charge of, like, trespassing. But you're not violating the First Amendment. Trespassing is not against the First Amendment. Right. Doesn't matter where you're trespassing.
Eugene, what do you think, based on what Mark was saying, that he overstepped his bounds?
You know, earlier I said if I were in Don's shoes, would I do a lot of things similar? And there are a lot of things similar that I would do, right? Because, again, you are following the story in that moment in which it's having. And I think it's also important to note, I mean, they went in there and at some point they were asking questions and the minister talked to them in that moment and answered those questions. So there was real question reporting that went on in that moment that I don't think can get overlooked in this case. But it was interesting. I think I heard, you know, the gentleman on the phone right now talking about how a decline of journalism over the years, right? And I'm curious to know exactly what the definition for him that he's pointing into decline. But some of the things I would say, kind of similar to what you just mentioned, Michelle, is like you can't have in one moment say, you know, journalists are not pushing enough. We're not getting journalists seeking for the truth. And then in a moment when it happens in this moment, then there's this critique there. But I think there's a lot of things that have been at play just in general when it comes to our industry over the last 15 or so years. I've had so many thoughts here in the last few minutes, you know, because Barbara mentioned even the 60-minute situation, right? So my internship before I took my first professional job was 6 months and 60 minutes, right? And so I would have loved to have interned in 60 minutes. It was great. But I cannot fathom a newsroom still ran by Don Hewitt, who had people in it like Mike Wallace and the Ed Bradleys. Yeah. And you can keep going on, that we would have even thought to have something like this to censor, you know, in that case. And that's because we understood that is what they do, you know. Right. You're going to have to be in certain scenarios where it's uncomfortable and it's challenging authority, it's challenging leadership, you know, media being the fourth estate for a reason, especially right now. That's so important because we're looking at, with all due respect to all of our local Congress leaders, but we're looking at a Congress that is effectively being pushed to the brink of whether or not it has any real power.
Exactly.
We are looking at a Supreme Court that is being literally over all of these different rulings that are being placed in their laps from a constitutional crisis standpoint, right? And that being the plan. And in the meantime, it's, okay, well, let's see how far we can push A, B, and C before we get some kind of ruling on it, right? So you need the media in these times in such a critical constitutional, I love that, constitutional crisis, to continue to ask the questions. And what we're running into is the dangers of all of these corporate mergers and what that can mean for how many journalists can be in your local communities, right? We just saw the president give his opinion, switch to a big merger that is on the docket right now. The FCC chairman's been on board for that as well. You have also that is looming at this point, just in general, the evolution of social media and everything. People can get their news or their information from there's just, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's a lot of factors that are rolling into what this gentleman is talking about, the decline, as some people may define it. And I would argue there are still great journalists who are trying and wanting to do great work in an era in which resources have dwindled. The pool of voices has only widened, right? And so those we are still there, right? But there's a lot of other factors that are now at play that have to be overcome on a daily basis for that work to get done.
I'm so glad you brought up that point about reminding people that good journalism is still being practiced, whether it's here at WHRO, which, we were talking about your process. I so respect your process when, you're selecting and airing stories, whether it's the journalism that's produced by Eugene and some of his team members, where they go into deep dives all the time with investigative journalism helping people. And, if you look to many of the network affiliates here who are doing good journalism on a daily basis, I think when we broaden the room and we talk about all of the voices you hear in this phone, and you get misinformation, you get just plain wrong,
people
false
are so
news.
bombarded.
They're bombarded with these messages, and it then puts us in this capsule of, are you a part of that? And you have to kind of fend off the noise and say, look to your sources, check the sources where you're getting your news. Your news diet has to be a part of, and all things local. We always used to push all things local news. Focus on that local coverage, which is going to give you the news diet that you need anyway, so you're in touch with your community. That's our job. We love doing our job, and there's still good journalists out there. Thank you for bringing up that point, Gigi.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I was speaking to a group in Portsmouth last night, and they asked me about cable news, and if I don't have cable, and I don't know how all the streaming services work to watch live stuff, so I don't watch cable news TV. But I did, we sort of as a group came to the conclusion that to be a really truly well-informed citizen, it takes a lot of work. And that wasn't always the case in people, a normal person's interaction with media. And we I think the conclusion that I came to, kind of working it out loud with this group, was that your local news, whether it's local TV, whether it's WHRO, whether it's your local newspaper, that's going to be your best bet. Even if I'm not going to name names, but I think we all know who I'm referring to here. Even if it's full of national wire stuff, that stuff is picked by people who are connected to your community. It's there for a reason.
And Will, we got about 2 minutes left before we have to go to a station break. But sure. I wanted to ask you this whole idea of anybody can be a journalist. Can you?
Well, yeah. I mean, that is part of it too. That has always been the foundation of journalism. You go back in the history of journalism, there wasn't always journalism schools and so forth. So that's part of it. When you say you can't have it both ways, that's part of it. So you shouldn't have to go to a journalism school and get all of these letters after your name to be considered a journalist. However, you should practice certain principles and certain ways of fairness in going about getting the news. So I don't know exactly what Don did as he came into the church, but I've covered contentious situations like that. And I've gone there, and one of the first things I did was make myself known to the pastor.
And Will, you know what? Do me a favor. Hold that thought.
Sure.
Because we got to go to a station break. You're listening to an expanded edition of Another View, and we're talking about journalism and the Trump administration. We'll continue our conversation, and Will continue his thought right after this short break. So stay tuned for more of Another View. And welcome back. This is an expanded edition of Another View, focusing on journalism under the Trump administration. Our guests include journalists Barbara Sierra, Eugene Daniel, Michelle Hankerson, and Will LaViste. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have about journalism today? What were your thoughts about the arrests of independent journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort? We'd love to hear from you. Give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Well, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Let's go back to you talking about what you were thinking in terms of Don Lemon being in the church.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, you caught me off my radio game. I usually had the sound bites better prepared. But yeah, I was saying, I would teach my students, just tell them to go into a situation like that, because I've been in contentious situations like that. Make sure you make yourself known to the leadership there, because you want to position yourself almost like you're a referee in a battle. You're not part of the activist crowd. You want to position yourself that way. So I don't know if he came in and he did that. I don't know if he just came in with the crowd or however, but that's the mindset that a journalist has to operate with, that you're sort of the referee in this battle. And then, but yes, you are a human being. You've got life experiences. You can see, what is BS from what is not. But that's how you have to position yourself in these situations. And I think that has become more and more blurred as people have seen other types of journalistic appearing type of mediums and activities on social media. Like I said, everybody thinking that they can be an interviewer. People are confused about, okay, what exactly is that particular role that the Constitution provides for, and that these journalists are doing to get the news and the truth to us. And all of what you see from the Trump administration is they understand the confusion, and it's all about using these tactics to increase distrust. And what we make the mistake of is falling into those traps. And I think that we need to be wiser about that.
I want to play a clip from Georgia Fort, who was talking about her thoughts about the impact of all of this happening on journalism, and particularly on Black journalists.
It's not new in America to see attack on Black journalists. I think in the last few years, we've seen an exodus of not just Black journalists, but journalists in general from mainstream media. There's been a series of things that have happened, right? Like the Pentagon reporters who were not going to comply with the new policies that were put in place, Kimmel being pulled off air, the segment on 60 Minutes not running when it was supposed to, and probably only running because of the outcry from the public, right? And so there's been a strategic attack on the free press for quite some time, but recently it is intensifying, and I would say that the arrest of myself and Don Lemon is a new level to threaten taking someone's freedom away for them simply doing their job, to try and criminalize journalism. Journalism is not a crime. And for me, when I think about the attack that we're currently seeing on the press, I really want American people to understand attacking the press is not simply just attacking journalists. It's attacking the public's right to know. We saw AI images being published by the White House that misportrayed the reaction of one of the protesters being arrested, right? The only way that we knew it was fake was because someone was there to document what really happened. And so we're entering a time where I do believe that this is an information war. And so the people who are standing up for truth, the people who are not afraid to document what's happening, I think that we're going to continue to be attacked.
Barbara, NABJ came out very, very strongly when this all happened, and they said, let us be perfectly clear. The First Amendment is not optional, and journalism is not a crime. You just heard Georgia react to that also. Your thoughts?
My thought is I agree completely with her idea that now is not the time to back down. The truth is too important, and you know that if you don't shine a light on it, people will not know where this democracy is going next, which I think is the biggest fear of most journalists right now, not being able to document what's going on so that people are ill-informed until it's too late. Not that I'm saying there's a doomsday machine out there with a clock ticking, although I think there is. But I do think that we do need to make sure that the press remains free. We don't back down from intimidation. But I also have to say is for these independent journalists, I hope you have an umbrella insurance policy, because honestly, they're coming after you. They're coming after your money. They're coming after what belongs to you. So you have to make sure you're protected and you're buttoned up in your reporting, because that kind of intimidation, I think, does cause people to back down as an independent journalist when you don't have the protection to, financially take care of yourself under law.
Under lawsuit. Misha, I want to ask you, because you use freelancers,
yes,
as part of your team for right now, as the newsroom continues to build. Yes. Is that a concern? Are you finding it more difficult to find journalists who are saying, you know what, I'm still going to be in the game, and let's do this?
Actually, no. We, I will say, Hampton Roads, unfortunately, doesn't have like a huge community of freelancers to begin with, but the ones that are here don't seem put off by anything that's happening, which is great. We have at least one who always offers to go out when there's a planned protest locally to get us some photos, get us some audio. I think that independent journalists understand the importance of their role, maybe even more so than those of us who are affiliated with a journalism organization. They're out there on their own, and they really have to they have to hustle, right? They have to get their own assignments. They have to find their own stories. Whereas if you work at a news organization, you could probably, for a little bit of time, get away with just like showing up and doing whatever your boss tells you to do. I don't think it will make you a good journalist, but you could get away with not caring.
You're saying there's more passion with some of the independent.
I think the independent journalists, by nature, are people who are not willing to back down. And freelancers, in my mind, are independent journalists. They are people who are driven to do this work for a reason more than, we get paychecks from a company. Mm-hmm. Independent journalists have to make their paychecks. And I'm not saying that people who work for a news organization care less than independent journalists. I don't think that's the case, but I think that when you are affiliated with a company too, you have to consider, I'm representing the company. I have to make a decision. I have to weigh, do I want to get taken in and have to call Maurice and say, can you please bail me out? Do I want to do that? And in some cases, can your news organization even afford to do that? Because they might not
that's
anymore.
The other piece. That's very true. Eugene, do you approach doing a news story now any differently in this era?
No.
How did I know that?
No, I think.
Well, what's the conversation though in the newsroom? Because those of us who are in the business know that we get together. There's morning meeting. People are tossing around ideas. And so forth. Is it still that same feeling, or are there times where people are like, I don't know if I'm going to touch that thing? Yeah, are you editing yourself?
Yeah,
exactly.
We definitely have a lot of responsibilities day to day. Right. I mean, we talked about the platforms, all the various means of platforms. I mean, for me, just in general, from a day, I'm on the air, I'm on streaming, I have a 2-hour ad lib stream with breaking news. There's a lot of things that are happening during the day. But when we have the conversations you're talking about, do we approach it differently? I say no, because I know why I got into it. Right. If anything, for now, it's okay. We got to buckle up more. Right. Got to buckle up for the ride. And that's just, as journalists, we have a duty to do our jobs, to make sure that we are not only truth tellers, but we are getting to the information that at times people don't want us to know. And, we do have those conversations in newsrooms, and for me, amongst like my friends and other colleagues, just from a standpoint of, okay, let's remind each other why we're doing this. We're not doing it for the glitz. We're not doing it for the glamour. We're not doing it for the likes. We're not doing it. And every once in a while, you kind of have to have that reset conversation. That's
a very good point.
You got to have that memory, be like, hey, this is the reason why I chose to do this. Whether it was the advocacy standpoint of it, whether it was, bringing, light out of something that's been hidden, whether it's solving a problem. Like, these are the reasons why we got into the job. So at least for me and my friends, those are the conversations that we're having. We can't back down.
Well, you talked about the celebrity journalists before, but I'm wondering, as you talk to your colleagues across the country, what's the conversation?
Well, I think the conversation is much like what Eugene said, is that the foundational things of what we do, why we went into the industry, still remain the same. I mean, I think about one of my heroes, Ida B. Wells. You talk about not backing down and being independent and being in a situation where you at risk but not backing down. That's absolutely what we do and what's core to what we do. So I think we can't stop doing that. I think what journalism does need is a serious campaign and marketing campaign about who we are and what we do. Because what is different from the Ida B. Wells era is what has been brought up by others, is that we have a lot more noise now. There's a lot more other mediums and a lot more things that appear to be journalism, and people are confused. So the organizations like Maynard Institute that I've been a part of, NABJ, I've been a part of, all the other institutions along with the media organizations should really look at having a major media campaign to explain who we are and what we do. Again, along with the journalism schools as well, and even offer opportunities for regular citizens to learn about journalism, to get classes. They don't have to go and get degrees, but get classes and get a clear understanding.
Do like the FBI does with the Citizens Academy. You do a journalism academy.
For journalists.
Yeah,
there
how
you
about
go.
that?
That's Hampton Roads Black Media Professionals. Go ahead, Citizen Academy for journalists.
We'll try to set that up ASAP. I mean, but to your point, what I think you're talking about there is media literacy. Yeah. And we do have a severe media literacy issue right now in our nation. I would argue we have a literacy issue as well, but a media literacy issue, and where, to your point, people don't know the difference, but they're consuming so much. And you're trained to consume so much in a little amount of time. Also, attention spans for news. So if it's not something that catches you in the first few seconds, right? It's hard in this moment. But I want to get Barbara. But one thing I want to say, you were saying earlier about the importance of what we do and what happens if media is not really buckled in at the moment. I just wanted to bring light to the slogan for the Washington Post. We know we just saw hundreds of journalists there who lost their jobs, right? We talk about, big corporations owning these in D.C., right?
In
and
DC,
the impact it has everywhere internationally. But democracy dies in darkness. That is the longtime slogan for the Washington Post, and I think it is fitting for the conversation that we're having right now. That is the reason why we are so important to the democracy of our nation, because we are here literally to question, literally to be able to expose, keep things in checks and balances when everything is also going haywire. And if journalists don't have that ability to do that job, if they're constantly under assault, constantly under threat, not being funded, all of these things, then what we risk is well beyond, the media landscape. It's like what
Georgia Ford said
itself.
It's like the truth that you won't get. I want to try to bring in Brandy Callum. She's a journalist and also a adjunct professor at Norfolk State University. And Brandy was on our show a couple weeks ago because she's, as an investigative journalist, she broke the story about public universities using eminent domain to take land from Black communities. So, Brandy, wanted to ask you about you and your students, and are you teaching them differently? What is their response to what's been happening?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to frame my comments here, I am also an independent journalist, but I used to work in corporate media. So my lens comes from like two different perspectives.
Okay.
When it comes to my students, we are having a lot of conversations about this in my classroom right now. And actually, I begin my semester this year. And actually, I do have an Ida B. Wells lesson in my course this semester, so I'm glad you brought that up. But I say that to say that I'm really trying to teach my students how to think critically about what they're seeing. And I think critical thinking what is also under attack here, because when we think about the role of journalists and what we do, we are informing people, and that information is what people use to determine their own perspective about what's happening around them. But when you take away that level of information and that deep level of reporting, then you get basically a black hole of information, which then makes it difficult for us to understand from a critical perspective, a critical thinking perspective, what's going on in the world around us. And it's almost like, and I hate to say it this way because I don't like to generalize, but it feels like we are living in the Matrix, so to speak, because a lot of this is happening, and I think we are all as journalists screaming out into the world, like, everyone pay attention, like this is wrong. And we keep, as Black journalists especially, have tried to warn people about what's to come, and we're seeing what's happening right now as a result of a lack of information and knowledge that people don't have access to because of all of these mechanisms that are intended to suppress information out there. So I teach my students about not just this conversation I've been listening to has been a lot about how to protect yourself when you go out into the world. But I think Will actually raised the point about how to think about the role of a journalist and what a journalist is actually supposed to do. And I think there's a lack of understanding about that in this generation that's coming into the journalism world. And so I try to teach my students about how to think beyond what they see in front of them. We talk a lot about critical thinking, but we also talk about history. And I think I'm not quite sure if it was Barbara, but someone said that this is not the first time journalists have been under attack. So this is not unprecedented. And I think that if we do shrink, we risk the chance of 50 years from now when a student, think about a student at Norfolk State or Hampton University. I'm just pointing at the HBCUs right now because I teach at one. But just think about someone seeking to understand this part of our history, right? Because we're living in a time where right now what we're seeing is so unprecedented, it feels like it's historical. And I just think that 50 years from now, if we're still around, but 50 years from now, when a student seeks to write a story about what happened in 2026, if we don't document that as Black journalists from the lens that we have, understanding that us as Black people have always been under attack, this is not nothing new for us. I think we do a disservice to history if we don't document it as best and accurately and honestly and transparently as we can.
Yeah, Will brought up that point about this not being new, and I think we need to underscore that point. What came to mind when I heard him say that was the late Jim Kincaid, when he rode with the Freedom Riders during the 60s. He rode on the bus, he reported what was happening, and he told me about riding with them to the South and getting what he called an old-fashioned Alabama beatdown by the locals when they pulled everybody off the bus and set it ablaze. And they attacked him, knowing that he was a member of ABC News, and it was an act of intimidation. Fast forward to the Floyd demonstrations when the CNN reporter was attacked and it was reported on. We've been seeing this encroachment. I'm identified as a journalist, and yet sometimes law enforcement will overstep and know that they are intimidating that messaging. So I think now more than ever, young journalists, especially those who are teaching, give them the strength that they need to be that next generation that doesn't back down. I had a professor back at the University of Arizona a long time ago who told us in the beginning, words I never forgot: when you're approaching a story, ask yourself, is it true? Is it fair? Is it necessary? And if it meets that bar, push on with that story. Everything we're seeing right now in our streets, it is necessary to report. Is it true? Believe your eyes. So is it fair? Everybody needs to know about this.
And if you think about, all the things that have happened, think about when Renee Good was murdered. If there weren't people, journalists and others with cameras, we would have had a whole different perspective on what happened versus the truth. And Brandy, you brought up a really good point, because I think of also, or when she was on, I was thinking when she said when people 50 years from now, because a lot of times as I'm reading news and consuming what's happening and working with, trying to decide on topics for this show and what's important to explain, I think about the fact that we are living in times where people are going to look back, and like we look back at Jim Crow, and eras like that. They're going to look back at this and say, what did you guys do? And what was happening? Which is pretty scary. So where do we go? Go ahead. Well, where do we go from here?
Well, I think these are some very valuable, important points. Shout out to one of my alma maters, University of Arizona. That's where I have my graduate degree. But I'm also a trustee and an alum at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And our newspaper, the Lincolnian, turned 100 years this past year. We had a celebration around it. It's one of the oldest black college or college newspapers, period. I think only the Howard's is a year older, the Hilltop. And one of the things I talk to the students about is look at these Lincolnians, look at how much you're learning about what was going on over these past 100 years. And look at the issues and how they are so similar and how students dealt with them. You've got to document what's going on today, because as the sister just said, 50 years from now, who's going to know? Who's going to know what happened during the pandemic and how you all dealt with the situation of being on campus or not being on campus? So we have to tell these students and re-educate to help them understand this is the first line of defense of history. That's what journalists do. And that's the only way you are going to know if it gets documented. The Lincolnian, my institution, I've been screaming up and down for a long while. We haven't been printing the printed publication, and haven't been consistent online.
Yeah.
Right. It's been basically digital, and they're not consistent. But something that happened. I know this is that I was talking to some the professors at Norfolk State. They said that when you do that printed publication, there's something about it that the students see is more tangible. And they can send it to grandma, send it to their parents. You have to document this. And the way things are now, the PDF can become the printed document. So you can still document it and save it as a PDF. You don't have to do a long print run. When people want that printed paper, you take that PDF and you print it. But you've got to document what is going on. You've got to document.
Okay,
That's what we do.
We have less than 5 minutes. I want to get some response from each of you in terms of where you see us going forward. And are you covering, I know you are, Eugene, the what happens in the trial? Because we still have Don and George's trials coming up. So, Barb, where are we going?
I'm not a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. But what I will say is that I do think that this is probably going to go all the way up the food chain since the feds rolled in, and it may end up being, who knows, before the U.S. Supreme Court. But I will say, probably not. But I will say that I think they're on the right side of the law. Everything that I've read seems to indicate that they are. What they charge him with is this federal statute of the FACE Act,
which had to do with protests against anti-abortion clinics. Clinics, yeah.
And
abortion clinics.
The irony, though, because it boggles the mind what they use legally to come at some of these journalists. But, I predict, and I hope that I'm correct, that this is eventually going to falter like many of the other criminal overreaches that the federal government has been engaged with.
Eugene.
Well, in terms of this
1 minute each.
This situation in and of itself, I think it's doing what it will continue to do and raise and highlight the importance of free speech, the importance of journalism and our First Amendment rights. I think also what it is doing is it's pumping a little bit of blood as well into just as journalists in general for us to continue to do what we're doing. I know it has for me and others that I've talked to. I hope as we have a lot of factors happening right now, not just with this, but again, we got looming mergers that are taking place. Journalism is going to continue, but the way in which we do it is going to continue to adapt and change. That's the thing that I know for sure is happening. So we're trying to figure that portion out. But what we do in and of itself is going to continue.
Misha, you get the last word.
I think what I keep thinking about is that accurate news that can be perceived as critical of administrations, of leaders, it persists even in countries that don't have First Amendments or the equivalent. And so I don't think that, regardless of what happens with Don Lemon and Georgia Fort's cases, journalism will continue. We as journalists need to be brave. We need to recommit ourselves to what brought us into this field. And we need to be transparent about how we do things, why we do things, what we're doing. And I think hopefully consumers who see the importance of a First Amendment and a free press will also, recommit to consuming news with an open mind. It's not wrong just because you don't like it. And I mean that for all parts of the political spectrum, all demographics. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's not true. And then I would just say, if you're a news consumer, the best place to get news is locally. So
gotta have local news. Absolutely. Thank you all so much. Will, thank you so much for spending your time. We know you sitting on the beach. You say you're back in the United States, but we know you're sitting on the beach.
I heard some waves.
Roll love. I always do it for you, bro.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to my esteemed panel. We really appreciate it. And audience, thank you for taking the time to listen to our program today. If you'd like to hear it again or share it with someone you love, just visit WHRO.org, or you could go to Spotify or any platform that you use for your podcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View, some fun as we learn the history of line dancing. Did you know it's Black History Month, y'all? Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Hey, show some love to someone. After all, it is Valentine's Day weekend. Please join us again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.